नमस्कार। आज के कार्यक्रम में आप सभी का स्वागत है। इस कार्यक्रम के माध्यम से हम केंद्रीय माध्यमिक शिक्षा बोर्ड के लर्निंग स्टैंडर्ड्स फ्रेमवर्क से अपने शिक्षक समूह को अवगत कराने की एक छोटी सी पहल कर रहे हैं। Good afternoon. Respected Chairman Sir, Director Academics, Director School Education and Training, the faculty and experts joining us from Azim Premji University, Bangalore, school leaders and teachers, my colleagues at the Cbse and the COEs, I welcome you and thank you for joining us as we initiate the first webinar in the series on the Cbse Learning Standards Framework. The enthusiasm across Cbse schools and teachers to be a part of this webinar has been just remarkable. All our inboxes have been flooded with requests for extending the registration process. So we are indeed grateful to all of you for showing such keen interest in this initiative. As we begin the program today, I would like to invite Dr. Joseph Emanuel, Director Academics, to set the context and introduce the program. Sir.
Sir, you are on mute, please.
Thank you, Dr. Shweta. Respected Chairman Cbse, Mr. Manoj Ahuja, Director Skill Education and Training, Mr. Vishwajit Saha, Dr. Shweta Singh, Dr. Pragya Singh, all the faculties from Azim Premji University, Ms. Anchal, Dr. Shilpi, Ms. Chandrika Muralidhar, Sri Vikas Chandra Roy, and Cbse resource persons, Ms. Bhanumati, Principal Kendriya Vidyalaya Malleshwaram, Ms. Manchu Arif, Principal Delhi Public School, Bangalore East, and all our colleagues, school leaders, principals, teachers, and my dear friends. Today is a beginning of a new journey. The new National Education Policy 2020 gives us a clear vision and direction towards shifting our school education from rote memorization to competency-based education. We have been discussing this aspect for the last many years. In fact, as a continuation of the last education policy, a lot of work has been done in this direction. And for the last 2 years, Cbse is also promoting competency-based education towards this direction. And it is a major change in the school education sector. Clearly, a shift is required from content-oriented learning to competency-based education. So in competency-based education, both understanding of the content, the knowledge, as well as its application in the real life scenario, both are equally important. So huge capacity building is required from the level of the teachers, from the level of the practitioners, and from the side of the students to move ahead with competency-based education. Cbse for the last 2 years has started with many new initiatives, such as started asking competency-based questions in the board examinations, teacher empowerment programs, systemic reforms like SAFL and SQA, all are introduced by the board to help the stakeholders to move towards competency-based education. So there is huge pedagogical intervention is required. So huge capacity building is required. Huge mindset change is required. In the last 80s, we saw a huge paradigm shift in the Indian education scenario. That is, we all tried to achieve complete literacy for the society, the National Literacy Mission, which is later on converted as Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. So now the shift is from education to all to education, quality education to all. So towards this direction, Cbse's leadership, Honorable Chairman, and all my colleague directors, all are working together. And Cbse's academic unit is taking the lead in this direction, and many partner organizations like Azim Premji University, Cbse, British Council, educational initiatives, they are all working together. Central Square Foundation, all are working towards achieve this aim. So NEP's vision needs to be realized. So this is paramount important to develop India as a developed nation. So to bring competency, to build our new generation with skill set, competencies, and abilities to attain their life's goals and desires is very important. To build global citizens, to achieve global competencies for our youngsters, this change is required. So this is a humble beginning from the side of the Cbse, and we are grateful to Asim French University for partnering with the Cbse and bringing out with this wonderful document. This document will empower the teachers and give them clear guidance uh, regarding how to apply competency-based education in the classroom. This document is clearly outlining the relation between curriculum, syllabus, textbook content, and the assessment towards attaining or ensuring achievement of learning outcome. So it's a wonderful opportunity for all our teachers, school leaders to participate in this workshop and webinar to give clear idea about this document. So CBSE's effort is to bring document at the secondary level as well as senior secondary level. This time we will be discussing about science at the class 9 and 10. And in the days to come, the documents prepared for the senior secondary classes will also be discussed before the teachers. So we request all the participants to share your feedback on these documents to make them more perfect and complete. So thank you so much for your wholehearted participation. We are overwhelmed by seeing more than 6,000 schools participating in this starting webinar. Grateful to all the school leaders and principals for showing this initiative. So under the initiative of our chairman, sir, we are spearheading with this NEP reforms and NEP implementation plan in Cbse. And I take this opportunity to invite sir to give his opening remarks and enlighten the audience with his line of thoughts. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Joseph. My colleagues from Cbse, the faculty from APU, other resource persons from Cbse and other organizations, and teachers and principals from various schools across the country who are present here for this webinar today. A very good afternoon, and it's indeed heartening to know that so many people are interested in joining this webinar, which just shows the interest which is existing, which is, I think, a prerequisite for any initiative one has to take. Dr. Joseph mentioned about the national education policy and the big thrust it lays upon moving from rote-oriented or content-based learning to conceptual understanding of issues, which is more learner-centric, recognizes the unique ability of a child, and a student is able to critically think, has a spirit of inquiry, is able to bring in creativity in his approach. And the challenge is, how do we translate this articulated vision into reality? And that's a big challenge. While you and I can discuss so many ideas, the reality is when we are able to actually implement it and implement it in a manner that it really achieves its objectives. And that's where the teachers and the classrooms would be the actual place where change would happen. And how would that happen? How can that be brought about? This is one step in that direction. The framework which has been developed, the learning standard framework for science for classes 9th and 10th, which has been developed, is one such, let me say, element in the ecosystem which will empower and enable teachers to actually bring about competency-based education in their schools. And there are more such frameworks for different subjects in class 10th and then in senior secondary school. If I was a teacher, the first question I would ask is why? And what's wrong with the existing system? And why are you telling me to do this? And will it actually improve what's going on? And that's a very justified and a natural question to ask. And anybody should, before let's say somebody tells me to do something, I would like to question, why is it different? Why is it better? And if you're telling me that this will work, then will it actually? And I think that is the kind of questioning or critical feedback and analysis we would accept. The broad premise on which this framework is based is, number one, rather than teaching as per a textbook or a fixed content, we are shifting to something known as, which all of you are aware about, learning outcomes. You're also familiar with the academic alternative calendar which Ncrt had brought about, which somehow kind of articulates what competency-based education is. So where the textbook perhaps plays a very small role, but then there are other ways you can ensure that the students in your class attain masteries over the competencies which are there. So this would, number one, shift from content and textbooks to certain standards and competencies which students should be able to demonstrate, which means textbook is only a small input into classroom transactions, or one of the inputs, I would say. Second, as it'll become, since my previous statement is that textbooks could perhaps play a small role, then what happens? How are classroom transactions going to be conducted? So the entire pedagogy or the pedagogical processes would undergo a change. What does that mean? And how would it be done successfully? That is two. Third, since you have standards and competencies, assessment, more of formative assessment becomes an integral part, because you have standards, so you can keep on assessing to ensure that the students are actually able to master those competencies, which is quite important. So therefore, standards, pedagogical processes and the changes and the assessment all would go hand in hand. The learning standards framework actually tries to enable a teacher to start from where he or she is. For example, you have a curriculum, you have a textbook, you have learning outcomes. How do you put them together? And then in that way are able to think about competencies from those learning outcomes from the particular chapters, because that's the way we've been teaching. And how do we bring about changes in pedagogical processes and also assessments? So all that is given in a very wonderful manner, and I must compliment all the resource persons and everybody behind this book which has come out for a job wonderfully done. As I said, it's just the beginning of the journey. You have this. How do we move forward? I think it can move forward only when there is willful acceptance by teachers, when they actually say and realize, yes, this is actually helpful. And that's why we would like to have continuous feedback. It's just a beginning, and I would say that it's an iterative and an evolving process. Your practitioner's viewpoint, your feedback, your understanding, your knowledge, perhaps is the most vital thing for success of any initiative, or for success and attaining the objectives of the national education policy. But like I said, it has begun very well with the overwhelming interest and support, and I think interest itself is a huge positive sign. I'm sure with whatever my interaction with our school teachers and principals has been, that it always leaves one more optimistic, more positive, and more believing in the possibilities of our education system. And I think you're all privileged to be pioneers in any change we bring about, because this will have, successfully done, it will have ripple effects across the education system in the country. That is what all of you are looking for. So I would once again thank you for giving me an opportunity to interact with you. And once again, let me compliment everyone, the listeners here, for their enthusiasm and interest, and the others the resource persons who worked behind to bring about such a beautiful publication. Thank you so much, and wish you all the best.
So thank you so much. Thank you for motivating everybody. The completion of the learning standard framework and its introduction to our schools and teachers is surely a defining moment for all of us here at the Cbse academic unit. We have worked along with Azim Premji University for, I think, almost 1.5 years to conceptualize, structure, develop, and exhaustively review this framework. So as we proceed to learn more about it, I would like to request Antara to play a short video about this framework. This has been prepared by Cbse, our partnering organization in this consultancy program. Antara ji.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Shanotra, if you could just pull up the video, please. As educators, each one of us strives to get our students ready for a rapidly changing world, gradually moving towards new and engaging ways of teaching and learning. One of the ways that we can equip our students with 21st century skills is by helping them build competencies, which the National Education Policy of 2020 focuses on. Competencies ensure that students build skills like critical thinking, analysis, and a grasp over applying the concepts learned in the classroom in real-life situations. One may wonder how to make this shift towards competencies in the classroom. And this is exactly what we will talk about. As we translate this vision to school education, the first step is to develop a shared common understanding of competencies that are important. This begins with redefining the curriculum as learning outcomes and competencies, and understanding how these translate in terms of teaching and assessment. Through subject-specific learning standard frameworks, the Cbse, along with Azim Premji University, has developed a comprehensive document that would be a valuable resource for educators as they deliver the curriculum with success. These frameworks are a comprehensive package which cover competencies, assessment frameworks, samples of pedagogical processes, blueprints, and assessment items and rubrics. The frameworks have been developed in partnership with educators, school administrators, and experts across India, some of whom have said that they believe the document can empower educators as they make the process of learning a joyous one. Are you a leader in your school? Are you keen to stay ahead of the curve and up to date with best practices? Then join us for a series of consultations that explain and take your suggestions on Cbse's learning standard frameworks.
Thank you so much. So as we move ahead to the next section of this webinar, I'll request Atul to pull up the presentation. I'll quickly sort of give you an overview regarding why these learning frameworks have been developed, what was the reason behind it, and our journey so far at the Cbse towards competency-based education. So education should be a transformative experience for each learner, and the National Education Policy has this very same vision. I quote, it says that education thus must move more towards learning about how to think critically and solve problems, how to be creative and multidisciplinary, and how to innovate, adapt, and absorb new material in novel and changing fields. Pedagogy must evolve to make education more experiential, holistic, integrated, inquiry-driven, discovery-oriented, learner-centered, discussion-based, flexible, and of course, enjoyable. This policy has given a very, very clear mandate to bring about competency-based education through para 4.6, where it is stated, to close the gap in achievement of learning outcomes, classrooms transactions will shift towards competency-based learning and education. But what exactly is competency-based education? What are the essential elements? Just a brief overview. So competency-based education is an outcome-based approach to schooling. CBE supports the learners to develop academic knowledge and skills, along with the ability to apply what they have learned to solve real-world problems, and also to develop capacities to become independent, lifelong learners. It demands a major shift in the school system in how we look at the curriculum, the teaching learning process, and of course, the assessment. So when we talk about the curriculum, let's move to the next slide, please. The focus, of course, is on learning outcomes, very clearly defined aims and objectives, which emphasize competencies that include the application and creation of knowledge, along with the development of important skills and dispositions, relevant depth and breadth of the curriculum, and adequate emphasis on inclusion of skills which can be transferred across the academic subjects, be it critical thinking, logical thinking, communication skills. Now, when we talk about how it transfers or in the classroom as a pedagogy, then the learning, it is the delivery of the curriculum is supposed to be learner-centric and focused on the learning outcomes. The focus, of course, should be on development of higher order learning thinking skills. The learning should be self-paced. That means a lot of agency is given to the students, empowering them to take important decisions about their own learning experiences. Now, when we talk about the assessment is supposed to be meaningful and a positive learning experience for the students. It should give the students varied opportunities to show evidence of his or her learning and also timely and relevant feedback. Assessment should also be of higher order skills. It should be interdisciplinary, synoptic, that means multiple topics linked together. Assessment also should be valid, that means of those outcomes which are considered important for the curriculum, and of course reliable. Then accessibility, inclusion, and equity are another very, very important elements. So CBE is actually based on the premise that all students can learn and succeed, and it hopes to reduce the inequities in student outcomes and achievement goals. Moving ahead to the next slide. Now, I want to talk about the Cbse's journey towards CBE. We undertook a host of initiatives. We started way early in 2019 by the adoption of the Ncrt learning outcomes by the circular number 5. After that, we started a very basic exercise of trying to define competencies and came up with terms or teacher energized resource materials, as well as achieving learning outcomes. We also launched a competency-based education online course for the teachers to log in and do on their own. This was a self-access course. After that, we collaborated with multiple organizations, Shri Aurobindo Society, Acer, Educational Initiatives, Azim Premji University, and also with the British Council for a 2-year-long CBE-based project. Now, during this project, we did an extensive survey, a research of how the Cbse system was ready, whether it was ready or not to adopt CBE. Besides that, a lot of teacher development activities were undertaken. During this whole process, a question bank was developed, lesson plans were developed, and of course, assessment frameworks were developed. Going ahead to the current learning standards framework. The learning standards framework, which we have collaborated with Azim Premji University, are focused on classes 9th and 10th, and they are for all our major subjects: science, mathematics, English, Hindi, and social studies. These are going to be a resource, an enabler for the educators in the classroom. And in fact, the first step to implement CBE is to have a common understanding, a shared understanding of what are those important competencies, be it from the perspective of those who are teaching in the classroom or those who are designing assessment. So although we had adopted the Ncrt learning outcomes, our curriculum was still listed as a series of content. So for example, if you recall in the science, it is listed under 7 themes or areas. So these range from food, natural resources, how things work, etc. Also, the Ncrt learning outcomes are quite broad in nature, and they give a lot of autonomy to the curriculum designer to apply it on various aspects. So for example, if the Ncrt learning outcome says that the students can relate processes and phenomena with causes and effect, this is equally applicable to the separation of mixtures or the law of chemical combination. So it was very important, it was imperative for us to figure out how those learning outcomes can be linked with the content areas to emerge with competencies. And this was the genesis of the learning standards frameworks. Now, when we started taking a look at various existing frameworks, be it the TIMS or the PISA or the Australian curriculum framework, we realized that a lot of material is already existing. So we already had the Ncrt LOs at hand. We also had the curricular expectations for various subjects. The missing part was the competencies, which were clearly defined and which would sort of delineate the scope of each topic and area. So this was the time when we started thinking of how we should structure the learning framework. It was a very, very systematic and exhaustive process. In a phased manner, we undertook this exercise. Once the document was designed, it underwent multiple iterations, reviews. I distinctly remember that we had 3 groups of around 10 to 12 teachers across the country who looked at the material. We had educators from higher education from Delhi University who were a part of the review process. And finally, this document is here for all of you to see, take a look, give us critical feedback. So I think the last thing which I want to point out is that you will notice that there is a very distinct emphasis on what is critical from the perspective of teaching of science in this framework. So you will find a lot of emphasis on the processes of science, on the development of scientific thinking, on how practicals are approached, and the multiple ways to do activities in the classroom. So taking you ahead to understand more about the learning frameworks, I want to call on the Azim Premji University team. So we have here with us Shilpi Banerjee, who's a faculty in Azim Premji University. She's a doctorate in educational assessment from International Institute of Information Technology, Bangalore. She has been involved in designing and offering courses on assessment on teacher educators, practitioners, and MA education students. Besides this, we have Vikas Chandra Roy, who has worked on different aspects of teacher professional development and has been a key part in conceptualizing, operationalizing, and implementing interventions at APU field institutes. He primarily engages in conceptual and pedagogical implications of science and environmental studies across the school curriculum through courses and workshops. We also have Chandrika Murlidhar, who's a faculty at the School of Continuing Education and University Resource Center, where she teaches at the postgraduate level and contributes to professional development program. She has been working in the space of science education, teacher capacity enhancement, curricular material development, textbook writing, and also as an editorial member of the university publications. Welcome to Team APU on this platform.
Thank you, Shweta ma'am. Let me share my screen. I hope my screen is visible.
Please, yeah, Shilpi.
Yeah. A very good afternoon to all of you. In this presentation, what we will do is we will try to present a brief overview of this document, and we will try to take you through different components of the Learning Standards Framework document for science. So, as you all know that NEP 2020 proposes a shift towards competency-based teaching and learning. So basically, this will lead to holistic and integrated development of students through development of knowledge, skills, and competencies that are relevant to the real world, and that will enable a child to be successful in the 21st century. So to align with this particular recommendation of NEP 2020, we have devised a set of standards, which is also known as Learning Standards Framework, for all the core subjects, that is science, social science, Hindi, English, and mathematics. So in December 2019, National Council for Research and Training, Ncrt, has proposed a set of learning outcomes. So in this document, an attempt is made to classify, to break down these overarching learning outcomes into specific set of competencies. These competencies reflect the subject-specific skills and are also aligned to the concepts that are addressed in the Cbse curriculum. And we are hoping that the understanding of these competencies will enable a teacher to understand the scope of the learning outcome better, and thereby help a teacher and a learner to plan the pedagogy and assessment for effective teaching and learning. So this flowchart, this particular flowchart depicts all the components of the Learning Standards Framework document, and we will take you through each of these components in this presentation. So the first component is about the nature of the subject. As per National Curriculum Framework 2005, school curriculum is a broad plan for cultivating certain capabilities among school children. And these capabilities are guided by the broader aims of school education. Different school subjects like science, social science, math, Hindi, English, languages. So these subjects acts like vehicles to attain these broader aims of school education. Science at this particular stage aims to inculcate scientific temper through achievements of certain skills such as objectivity, critical thinking, aesthetical sensibility, etc. So this particular section, this particular component in the framework talks about how knowledge is constructed in science, what are different methods of inquiry in science, what are different focus of method, most importantly, what is the importance of engaging with science at this particular stage. The next component is about NCRT curricular expectations and learning outcomes. So the aim of science education is very broad, and we cannot aim to achieve this particular broad aims of education at one go. So a possible approach which is undertaken is to classify these broad aims of education into state-specific outcomes. These are also called as curricular expectations in the NCRT document, which is proposed in December 2019. So we have taken the same curricular expectation which is proposed by NCRT, and as you can see, the broader aims of science education is basically attained through defining curricular expectation at each of this stage, that is upper primary, secondary stage and senior secondary stage. And the learning outcomes for class 9 and 10 will basically enable the attainment of secondary stage learning curricular expectations. The next component in the framework document talks about the different content domains. Now, each learning outcome basically talks about certain cognitive skills and certain content domains. So the content domains which are taken in this particular document are aligned to the Cbse curriculum. As you can see, the content domains of food, material, world of living, how things work, natural phenomena and natural resources are taken in this document. So basically the whole objective, the whole idea is to help teachers see the connection between the textbook, the curriculum, basically the concepts which are given in the curriculum, and the learning outcomes which are stated by NCRT. The next component in this framework is about subject-specific cognitive levels. So basically, cognitive processes are different thinking processes which a student is expected to engage in with the different content domains which are defined in the Cbse curriculum. So in this document, we have attempted to define certain subject-specific cognitive levels which are basically aligned, which are basically drawn from the revised Bloom's taxonomy table. The idea behind developing the subject-specific cognitive level is that these cognitive levels reflect the disciplinary knowledge and the methods for science. So based on the nature of learning outcomes defined for science, we have defined three cognitive processes, that of knowing, reasoning and applying. This particular framework draws largely from the international assessment frameworks of TIMSS and PISA and also revised Bloom's taxonomy table. To explain further, one of the content domain in science is talks about force and laws of motion, and you can see that how each of these cognitive levels gets transformed, gets defined for this particular concept. The cognitive process of knowing talks about the thinking processes of recalling, describing and providing examples. The cognitive process of applying talks about comparing, relating, using, interpreting and explaining the different processes, facts, concepts, and theories. The cognitive process of reasoning talks about identification, integration, verification, planning, evaluating, and drawing conclusions and experimentation. I would now like to invite Vikas to talk about competencies, the subject-specific competencies which are defined in this particular framework.
So, thank you, Shilpi. As you can see, we have tried to link this whole competencies thing right from the beginning. So we have aims of science education, and then we have curricular expectation, and then learning outcomes, and then competencies. So as you all know, and Shilpi has also told, we already have curricular expectations in place and learning outcomes in place, which are given by Ncrt. And now let's see how these competencies are flowing out of the learning outcomes in our framework. So I will just take you through a few samples of physics, chemistry, and biology to get a sense how these competencies are flowing out of the learning outcomes. Yes, Shil. So as you can see, what we have done in each content domain, we have picked a chapter and we have mapped the corresponding learning outcomes to that chapter. So you can see here's a chapter from class 10 and chapter name is how things work. This content domain is how things work and chapter is electricity. So we have mapped this chapter with a particular learning outcome. And as you can say, this learning outcome, which has been provided by Ncrt, and we have been using it as practitioners from quite a time, are quite broad. And they have several examples. You can see calculates using the data given, such as number of atoms in reactants and product to balance a chemical equation, resistance of a system, resistor, power of a lens. So these are examples from few chapters which are there. So now as we are taking one chapter, what we have done, we have carved out content domain specific learning outcomes from these learning outcomes for a particular chapter. So you can see that it has become more specific. The content part, specific content part of a chapter has been converted into a content domain specific learning outcomes. So you can see calculates the unknown variable by using appropriate formula and assigning a relevant unit. So now it has become more specific. Learning outcome was quite broad with a lot of examples, but pertaining to this chapter, we have indicated a very specific conceptual part of that chapter. And based on this content domain specific learning outcomes, we have teased out very specific and tangible competencies. As you can see, a few competencies are there. Calculates the resistance, potential, difference, current, heating of a circuit. So now, as you can see, this is a progressive flow where a learning Ncrt learning outcome has been mapped to a particular chapter, and then we have derived content domain specific learning outcome, and then we have derived finer competencies. So this progressive flow gives you a sense how to design your pedagogy and assessment strategies in classroom. So when it's quite definite and granular, you are able to think more about pedagogy and assessment strategies. And these competencies are illustrative. While working on ground, while working with students in the classroom, if you feel like some more competencies can be added, that can be done. So this is just to give you a sense, but we have tried to keep it comprehensive. So what happens here, the whole potential of a learning outcome, whole learning spectrum of a learning outcome is realized through these competencies. So I am aware what I need to do in the classroom in terms of pedagogy, what kind of assessment I have to do. So some kind of clarity emerges. So this is an example of class 10th physics. We can have a look at another example, Shilpi. So this is from chemistry. Again, you can see content domain, chapter, and key concepts are given. And these are from Ncrt syllabus. So material is the content domain, and chapter is periodic classification of element. Key concepts are mentioned. Now again we have tagged the mapped the learning outcome to this chapter, Ncrt learning outcome, and we have derived content domain specific learning outcome, which is very specific and indicates towards a conceptual part of that chapter. And now based on that, competencies are derived. Similarly, for biology also, you can see world of living is the content domain. Chapter is how do organisms reproduce. There are key concepts. Now to this chapters, we have mapped a corresponding learning outcome, which is quite broad with lot of examples, as you can see. What we have done, we have carved out content domain specific learning outcome from that, and we have pinpointed or we have indicated a conceptual part of that particular chapter. Based on this conceptual part, these are the competencies. So you can see this particular learning outcome is about conducting investigation and experiments and arrive at and verify the fact, principle, phenomena, or to seek answers to queries on their own. So basically, conducting investigation and experiments. Now, this is the very specific part. You can see content domain specific learning out. You will conduct investigation and experiments around modes of reproduction in plant animals, contraception, and STD in humans. And based on this conceptual part, you have several competencies. So competencies, as in learning outcome also, is a mix of subject-specific skills and the content part. Here, when we have defined competencies, we have made it more specific and tangible. So basically, granularity is increasing as we progress from the broad learning outcomes of Ncrt towards these finer competencies. So in this framework, we have also tried to emphasize upon certain underrepresented learning outcomes by providing pedagogical cues in terms of competencies. So you will get indication of how to engage community in science teaching learning processes, how to make such an environment such an environment where learners are engaging in scientific argumentation with their peers. How investigations and experiments can be designed, which are a bit non-conventional and out of the box, yet mapping back towards the competencies. So as a practitioner, you might have several ideas, but certainly these competencies will help you in designing your classroom experiences. So as Shweta ma'am has also said that across the framework through these competencies, we have attempted to foster 21st century skills, and very specific to science, I must say, evidence-based thinking, problem solving, collaboration, and also how creativity and innovativeness can be brought in when it comes to science classroom. So all in all, we have tried to give you a tool which can be used in the classroom for achieving the learning outcomes in a better way. Yes, Shilpi. So, you might be wondering how these competencies will be used by the practitioners in the classroom. So, what we have done that we have samples of pedagogical and assessment strategies, which will give a sense how this thing will flow in the classroom from the competencies to the pedagogy and assessment, and how pedagogy and assessment will go hand in hand achieving the learning outcome. So now Chandrika will take you through those samples. I will invite Chandrika to take over.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, Chandrika.
Yeah. So Vikas and Shilpi have spoken about the subject-specific content domains and the cognitive levels and the competencies. If you look at the slide now, it is showing us a kind of a triangulation between the learning outcomes, the teaching learning activities, and the assessment. So what we'll be talking about now is some sample pedagogical processes and assessment strategies. Um, yeah. So if we look at this slide, this is a sample which has been taken from the document. So to familiarize you with what this part of the document is about, if you see, there are 3 areas that have been spoken about here: the learning outcomes and competencies based on a certain content domain, the pedagogical practices, and the processes and the assessment strategies. Now, if you see on the first column, you have the competencies which have been articulated, classifies compounds as bases or acids based on their reactions with litmus, etc., and categorizes indicators as natural and synthetic type. Now, if you look at the pedagogical processes for achieving these competencies, is begin the class by asking the students to mention a few acids, bases, and salts which they come across in their daily life, and so on. So, and the pedagogical processes you will find in the document also has questions for discussion. So it kind of supports the teacher to steer the conversation towards the content which is being dealt with, and also to achieve the said competency. In the third column, if you see, there are assessment strategies. Let's take an example. Let's take the second example. Explain the color change seen in indicators when they react with solutions of varied acidic and basic nature. So, so if you look at the document has some exemplar pedagogical processes and assessment strategies which have been included. We have the next slide. Yeah. So the rest of the document has sample question paper design, sample select response and constructed response assessment items, and sample marking schemes. So a sample question paper design is a sample. It is for your reference, just to give you an idea as to how all these aspects of the document can be utilized in the creation of a question paper. And the sample select response and constructed response items are nothing but the MCQs and sort of detailed questions, answers, or answers which have, you know, where the student needs to write a few sentences to answer the question, and sample marking schemes. So this is also, again, it's a kind of a support for the teacher, so that the teacher knows exactly how she or he can include these competencies in the creation of items, that is question items or questions. What is also included in the document are some sample questions which kind of take into consideration everything that has been included in the document. Like Shilpi and Vikas have already mentioned that in the document you will find many areas which you are familiar with, like the content domain. Which are the themes, like food and materials and how do things work, natural phenomena, natural resources, etc., and learning outcomes from the learning outcomes document. Now, if you see this slide, we have put together all these aspects which we have discussed in the document and made it into a question, a sample question. So you will have sample questions in both the multiple choice type of question, and also the constructed response, that is the descriptive type of questions. So if you see here in this slide, The competency being addressed is explains the separation of sand and water using filtration. Vikas has already spoken about the cognitive levels that we spoke of. We spoke of knowledge, applying, and reasoning. So in the cognitive level, it's the applying cognitive level. And in every cognitive level, there are varied thinking processes. So here the thinking process which is being referred to is relate. And the other details are there. And then you have the item stem, which is nothing but the question. Now, if you see the question, and after the question, you have the correct answer with the given reason for the correct answer, and distractor 1, 2, or 3. Distractor is basically an option that we give other than the correct answer in a multiple choice question. So ideally, we think there are 4 distractors. Out of the 4 distractors or 4 options, one of them is going to be the correct answer, which is the key or the correct answer. So if we look at the question, what we have tried to do is we've tried to match the competency with the question or the item that we have created, and given you various samples of such multiple choice questions. Another example that we can look for is this. This is again the content domain is materials, and the learning outcome here is plans and conducts investigations, experiments to arrive at and verify the facts, principles, phenomena, or to seek answers to queries on their own. And the competency being assessed here is assesses the given experimental setup and proposes an alternative to conduct experiments. So if you see here, this is it's a 3-mark question. And it is a question which has a diagram to it, and based on the diagram, the question has been asked. So it's matching with the competency that we have chosen. So this is one. We have such examples also, which are included in the framework. So if this is the question, and we need to look for what kind of answers that do we expect from the children, we have what we call as the marking scheme. So if we look at the this particular slide, the question has been put up there, and look at our marking scheme. The first one, the 1 mark is for writing the name, because the question says name the chemical compound in marble chips that reacts with hydrochloric acid. And the second one is to write the formula of the compound. Now, when we look at the second question, the experimental setup is incorrect. Draw the diagram for the correct experimental setup. So if you see that the answer, we are expecting that the child, when she or he draws the diagram, it will write, he or she will draw the correct diagram for this particular setup. And if you see under further information, what is the purpose of writing further information? That if a child is not exactly writing what we expect the child to write, but something which tells us that the child has understood the concept, or the comprehension of the concept is relatively good for the child in terms of the way in the child which the child has answered the question, we need to give information about this. So instead of using one particular apparatus, the child could also, instead of using a gas collection jar or a cylinder, the child could also use a round bottom flask or a flat bottom flask. So the learning standards framework document is complete with all these aspects, which would only help to support the teacher to adapt this document appropriately in his or her classroom. So Shilpi, I'll just quickly wrap up. Is that okay?
Please go ahead, Chandrika.
Yeah. So when we look at the overall document, we see that we have put together the content domain, the cognitive levels, the learning outcomes, the competencies, the sample design of the paper, and some sample questions. So if you see that the whole the document is steered by competencies, and we feel that the competencies can steer the teaching learning process in the classroom, and competencies can also provide opportunities for the teacher to initiate different kinds of questions that she or he can pose in the classroom to assess the learning of children. And they also, competencies also provide a platform for the teachers to create questions for assessment which are aligned with the competencies. So it basically helps a teacher to go on to an exploratory journey in designing the lesson plans for the subject, the pedagogy and assessment around the competencies. So overall, if we see in all, the document is a great support for a science teacher to move towards competency-based assessment. Over to you, Shilpi.
So thank you so much, Shilpi ji, Chandrika ji, and Vikas ji. While Shilpi ji walked us through various components of the complete learning standards framework document, Vikas ji introduced us to the heart of this document, which is how the competencies link to the Ncrt learning outcomes and specific content-related outcomes. And of course, Chandrika ji try to emphasize how a particular competency translates itself into a pedagogy and also into an assessment item. So thank you so much, Shilpi ji, Vikas ji, and Chandrika ji. This is the time where I would also like to inform all our participants that the chat box option for you to type in and ask your question is open on this platform as well as the YouTube live platform. So in case you have any questions, please feel free to put them on the comment section of the YouTube live and we'll try to address them. Now I would like to invite Mrs. Manju Arif. She's the principal of DPS Bangalore North, a passionate biology and science teacher. Mrs. Arif promotes scientific inquiry in a classroom and brings science lessons to life with real-world application. Understanding the need for sustainable development, she promotes the integration of ethical, legal, social, and moral values in the teaching of science. She, along with her team of science teachers, undertook a thorough review of the framework document. I invite her to share her experiences with all our participants. Ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. Good evening, respected Chairman, sir, Dr. Joseph Emmanuel, Dr. Singh, my fantastic colleagues from APU, whom it was a pleasure to work with, and the 6,000 participants who are watching us this afternoon. I must tell you that for all the 11 teachers from Bangalore who worked on this project for a year and a half, this was a life-altering learning. We unlearned and relearned in many different ways. We also strengthened many of our understandings and removed many of the misconceptions that we had as teachers and learners. Like Dr. Singh said, we had this document come to us that was reviewed by authority and people in the subject. And so we had a document in our hand. We had the learning outcomes from Ncrt, and we had the NEP to guide us on core concepts, saying, let's dive deeper into the subject, rather be broader. So given all this, we put our years of practice as teachers to build a document that all teachers could use. A fresh graduate who comes to teach science and an experienced teacher who'd been teaching science for 30 years would all make sense of this document. So from identifying the core concepts, from coming from the breadth of it into the depth of it, and to develop competencies, that is, bring words in use from Bloom's taxonomy that hitherto were just words from a B.Ed college to science. And you saw that in the examples. You saw, investigate, you saw evaluate, you saw create, you saw interpret, you had infer, and we put all those competencies that we wanted to develop in children. And while we were doing that, we realized that when you want to develop these competencies, your understanding of core concepts becomes stronger and firmer. And that was the intent. The whole intent was that. How are we to do that? How are we to build these competencies? Like Chandrika ma'am said, through pedagogical strategies, through newer ways of teaching and learning that would enable these competencies to come out in children in a joyful, in an experiential way, in a way that they could relate to the surroundings. And the pandemic was a fantastic time to do that because you were away from labs in school, you were at home, and your home turned into the lab. And so we tried to bring all those kinds of simple things that we could use in our homes into the classes, in addition to the online labs. No learning is complete if you're not able to assess how much the child has learned. And that came into the second phase of the program, where we were designing pedagogical strategies and then assessments. Again, formative and summative assessments were discussed in detail, so I don't have to give any examples. But every now and then, as teachers of physics, chemistry, and biology worked on their separate domains, but when we got together to brainstorm, we would come with misconceptions that the other had, and that became a starting point for dialogue, for competency building, and for assessment questions. So we kept at it for a long time, and we were glad to be doing that. In doing all of this, we kept three things in mind. We kept the idea of, like Shilpi said in the beginning, connecting the topics of science, of not alienating physics and chemistry and biology, but finding the connects that exist between them. We also tried to bring an interdisciplinary approach of connecting curricular subjects with science and co-curricular subjects with science. So there was sports and science, there was arts and science, there was music and science, and everything that we could bring together to enable teachers of science to use this document in a user-friendly way independently. In doing all of this, like Shilpi said, we kept in mind sustainable development, which was an SDG that we wanted to achieve, and to keep ethical, legal, social, and moral values at the back of every science learner. We enjoyed the experience, and we hope that all of you who read the document and use it in your classes, and because this is again on a common domain, parents who wish to help their children in the process of learning can also use this document. I wish you all success in your classrooms and happy learning of science. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manju ma'am. Thank you. Now I would like to invite Srimati Bhanumati. Bhanumati ma'am is the principal of Kendriya Vidyalaya Malleshwaram, Bangalore. She is a master's in science as well as education, a PG diploma holder in ecology and environment, and also school leadership management. She has a vast teaching and administrative experiences. She has been contributing to the development of teachers' resource material and has also been the recipient of the KVS award at both regional and national levels. I request you, Bhanu ma'am, to talk a bit about how you feel that this document would be important and of value to a practitioner.
Thank you, madam, for giving me this opportunity to go through this document. Actually, when I was going through this document, I feel that the document of learning standard framework covered all the learning outcomes, whether it is a general and specific, keeping in mind the competencies to be acquired topic-wise. The document is divided in such a way that it is both student and teacher friendly. When the teacher reads this framework, teacher gets a clear idea as to what has to be taught for a particular topic at micro level to integrate core concept competencies and skills that ought to be the most integral part of children's lives, help them to learn independently and think critically and creatively. The framework gives an opportunity for peer sharing between the teachers of various disciplines. The subject committee meeting can be held once in fortnight to discuss about team teaching, about assigning multidisciplinary projects and assignments, etc. Suppose a science teacher, for example, I can tell if a science teacher would like to take a topic on forest, here the subject teachers of social science, language teachers also can be involved to incorporate everybody's idea to bring the competency in the children. For example, the geography teacher can tell about the climatic conditions and the adaptability of the plants to the particular environment. And biology teacher can tell about the flora and fauna found in the forest. And language teachers can describe the forest, its benefits, and its conservation also. In this part, conservation part, when it comes, the local community can also be involved. By involving the local community, the children also will get the hands-on experience to work with the local community. So the children will develop the competencies like investigating about the types of forests, critically analyze the causes of deforestation, and think creatively innovative practices to conserve the forest by taking part along with the stakeholders, whereby the children inculcate values like cooperation, coordination, and love for nature. Many examples are given in this framework, and the teachers can use the same, or they are free to use their own ideas as per the classroom situation and the need of the learners in that particular classroom situation. In this framework, not only the contents and concepts and competency is being taken care, even the assessment part. If you see the assessment part when they were explaining, it was very clear. It discusses only the specific competencies to be assessed through MCQs, CCT, and assertion and reasoning questions, then short and long answer type questions. Apart from this, teacher can also use their own mode of assessment as per the requirement of the Vidyalaya. And dear teachers, this framework have taken care of the minutest details of the pedagogical approach, competency to be acquired, and the learning outcomes. However, the teachers can use their own improvised techniques based on the need of the learning group in their respective classes. But I would request all the teachers and the principals to go through this document, and really it is an interesting document where I feel that no lacuna as on date I found in this document. Of course, it depends upon the mind of the teachers also. You please go through this document and implement in the classrooms, and I think the children can come to our expectation, and they will learn to get all the competencies which are needed for this present day situation. And that's all from my side. I thank you for giving this opportunity, and I wish all the teachers and the principals to implement the very best to all the team members for this framework. Thank you. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Bhanumati ji. I think besides the specific strategies that you shared, one very important point which you emphasized was that the framework gives only sampler designs and assessment items and pedagogical approaches. So it is the onus lies on the teacher to look at the context in which he or she is and the learners there, and accordingly design her own plan of action, the plan of teaching which she has to adopt. So moving ahead, I would like to let you know that the framework itself looks like a very daunting big document. However, our partner organization, Cbse, has done a fantastic job of breaking it down into sections and providing brief summaries about each aspect. So it will be accessible to all our participating teachers on this platform. Now, we are requesting your critical feedback, your honest feedback on this document. Which are the sections which perhaps you have understood or not understood? Anything more which you want from us on this particular resource? And the feedback which we request you is supposed to be given on a set of very brief number of questions, approximately 6 to 7 questions. There will be a separate link for administrators, a separate link for science teachers. After this webinar, we'll be emailing the links for the feedback. It is by invitation, and we request all of you to participate and give us your feedback. Now, I would like to invite Antara to talk more about the platform. Just a brief about Cbse. Civic Innovation Foundation, or Cbse, works to enable effective dialogue between policymakers and stakeholders. It helps to present policies in very simple and approachable format and help to collect and share feedback from stakeholders. So Antara Vasudeva is here with us from Cbse, and I would request her to demonstrate the platform and the feedback process.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Good afternoon. I think Dr. Singh has done a very just introduction to what we do at Cbse, but we are a non-profit organization that works to enable effective stakeholder dialogue through consultations similar to the one that we are attending today. Our work involves consultation design, simplifying policy documents, conducting outreach, and gathering feedback from stakeholders on draft documents. In the past, we have worked with government partners like the Niti Aayog, the Supreme Court E-Committee, the National Institute of Urban Affairs, and others. And today I can say that we are proud to be Cbse's consultation partner for the Learning Standard Framework document. We're looking forward to facilitating your feedback on the document, and I'd now just like to request my colleague Shanotra to play a short video which will demonstrate how you can submit your feedback on the Learning Standards Framework. Shanotra, over to you. Through this short video, I will be taking you through how you can share your feedback on Cbse's Learning Standard Frameworks. This consultation has two equally important parts. One is the webinar, which you are currently a part of. The second is the opportunity to share your feedback on the documents shared by Cbse. This will be done through our portal Cbse. In a few minutes, I will just be taking you through how you can share your feedback on this consultation. A link will be shared with you on the webinar as well as through email. Upon clicking on the link, you will arrive at this page. Over here, in a few easy steps, you can go ahead and create your account. You can select the city from which you are responding and enter your official email ID. You'd also be requested to allocate a password for this particular account. Once you agree to the terms and services, you can create your account. Sharing your phone number will allow us to reach out to you and give you updates on the progress of this particular consultation. Once you complete your sign-up process, you will have to go back to your email inbox, where an activation link would have been shared with you. Please click on that activation link to verify your profile. Clicking on the blue button to confirm your email, you will land on this page. This is the consultation page for the Learning Standard Frameworks documents. Welcome. The documents themselves have been constructed in a very usable and reader-friendly manner. In this 4-minute summary, you will understand different parts and components of the document. If you are keen to read more, you can also click on these links available here. This will open you up to the specific page of the Learning Standards document, and you can go through it in detail. Alongside that, we have the option to submit our feedback. You can select how satisfied you are with the consultation process, and then respond to the questions which are placed below. Some questions are multiple choice, and you can choose multiple options. Others are those where only one option can be selected. There are also long text questions. Alongside that, you can also select another option and type here. After you have filled the questionnaire, you can go ahead and submit your response. Subsequent to submitting your response, you can also engage with the document through this Discuss and Engage tab. Over here, you can understand other perspectives being shared by teachers and ask any questions you may have. However, this tab will only be open for the first 48 hours after the link has been shared, so please do share your response quickly. Thank you, and we look forward to reading what you have to say.
Thank you so much, Shrutra and Antaraji. So I'll just once again reiterate that the feedback link would be open for approximately a week. There are options to give your questions and remarks also. And in case you are unable to do, then there is a discussion forum which will be operational for about 48 hours or so after this webinar. I would also like to inform you that we are going to follow this particular webinar with a series of webinars for other subjects, and we'll be notifying the dates and the timings about those shortly. Now we have approximately 5 to 7 minutes for any questions which were asked. So I'll request Achalji to help us to listen to those questions and respond to them. Thank you.
So thank you everybody for your questions. In the interest of time, we'll address a couple of them. So the first question is to Joseph sir. So there's a question by Ravinder Pandey sir on how do we close the gap between secondary and senior secondary curriculum for science? And if you could please describe the plans of Cbse to take this work forward with the senior secondary stage curriculum as well.
Thank you, Achalji. As you are aware, Cbse has already completed learning framework document in the class 10 subjects. Major 5 subjects are already covered in class 10. And Asim Premji University has extensively worked on developing learning framework in class 10 subjects. English, Hindi, Science, Social Science, and Mathematics are covered in class 10, class 9 and 10. And for senior secondary classes, the major subjects, physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, and languages, and humanities, commerce, in all these subjects, on a similar way, learning standard framework is being developed in collaboration with the educational initiative. So these documents are under preparation and almost at the final stage. So for the teachers of the senior secondary classes, these documents will be made available very soon. In a similar way, what we are doing for the secondary classes, webinars and discussion forums, as well as workshops will also be organized to familiarize teachers in the new framework. So a massive exercise is being undertaken by Cbse in collaboration with the partner organization to facilitate the teachers and the school system as a whole.
Thank you, sir. My next question is to Shilpi. Shilpi, there are a couple of teachers like Francis, Meenakshi, and many others who are interested in understanding that how does this document help in facilitating a classroom where children may be at different learning levels, and specifically in the context of the learning loss that we are experiencing right now. How do you think this document will enable them to channelize their pedagogy more meaningfully?
Yeah, thanks, Anchal. So I think that's a very relevant question at this context. So let me try to answer. So there are two things, two ways in which this particular document can help classroom teachers. One is, if you can see, this document has some sample pedagogical processes and assessment strategies. And through these samples, you will be able to draw some principles of doing effective formative assessment. So you see, right now at this stage, children are not at the same level. So some standardized kind of assessment will not work here, will not help here. So what we need to do is, what we need to develop is, we need to understand the learning level of each and every individual child, and then devise the pedagogy accordingly, right? So the assessment strategies and pedagogical processes, the core principles which are followed are, each of these samples are student-centric, they are competency-centric, and they are assessment-centric. So using these principles, we are hoping that you will be able to devise effective formative assessment strategies. That is the first part. And second is, we have proposed a set of competencies, and these competencies are very specific. And if you use these specific competencies to design your formative assessment, you will be actually able to gauge students' learning level very well. So these are two ways in which this document will be helpful.
Thank you, Shilpi. My third question is from teachers. Several teachers have asked this question, like Ankita and Subhash, that how does this document help a science teacher in enabling experiential learning and inquiry-based teaching? So I'd request Chandrika or Vikas to kindly respond to this question.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. One thing is that, as we have explained during the webinar, is that the competencies have been articulated keeping in mind the various cognitive levels. And if you see, every cognitive level that we have included has varied thinking processes, and every thinking process has is related to the basic science process skills. So when we look at inquiry, when we look at problem solving, critical thinking, these are all aspects of science process skills, and they have been included in the way in which the competencies have been articulated, keeping in mind the varied cognitive levels. So when this is done, what happens is the whole approach towards inquiry based teaching and learning gets included in these competencies.
So, right, Chandrika. So, I will give some specific examples when it comes to inquiry-based learning and experiential learning. So, if you look at those learning outcomes which relate to investigate and experiment, the competencies which are teased out, they are providing you a cue to what to do. Suppose if you see, there will be an indication to do a project in the nearest PHC, or this will give you an idea that we can take up certain questions which are quite pressing in our community, in our immediate environment. Can a group of students undertake that and do it in a form of project? So that kind of indications are there. Similarly, if you talk of learning outcomes which relates to history of science, or there is a competency which says that you have to trace out the journey of this scientist in terms of invention and his life. So when you are doing that kind of thing in groups, several groups or individual projects, you are asking some questions to yourself, and you are also exploring what else can be done, what kind of literature can be seen, what kind of mistakes that scientist did, where I will find that particular thing. So this whole thing is quite exploratory, and when you approach this thing in that way, definitely this experiential learning and inquiry-based learning will take place. Some amount of moderation will be required from your experience as a teacher. So these competency will definitely give you some indication what needs to be done. Similarly, in biology, you will see certain competencies which talk about you have to look at flowers, several flowers in your surrounding post fertilization. So you have to plan certain dissections where you can look at the difference in the reproductive parts of several flowers. So this may give you idea that what else I can do as ma'am said, Banu ma'am said, that you have to improvise. So this is just an illustrative competency, but it will certainly give you a sense how to design my pedagogy so that it's inquiry based and experiential. And as Chandrika said, all these processes will relate to different cognitive levels, and you will be able to assess them through these competencies only.
I would just like to add here that the very way these competencies have been written, it is impossible to approach them unless and until your teaching approach is experiential and inquiry based in nature. So for a teacher, it's very difficult to look at those competencies and plan your teaching learning method in a way when it is only teacher directed. It has to involve our students and engage the students in the process.
Thank you, Chandrika, Vikas, and Shweta ma'am. And I think in the interest of time, those are the 3 questions we will take. There are many more questions, and we will prepare a discussion forum to take those questions offline. Thank you so much, everybody, for your questions.
Thank you, Achalji. And I'm seeing in the chat box that a lot of participants are texting their email IDs. It just is not required. We have your nominations and we have your email ID. We'll revert back to you and provide the links for the feedback. So as we end today's program, I want to thank all of you for participating actively and interacting with our resource people. I want to thank my team from the APU, my colleagues at the Cbse, Manju ma'am, Bhanu ma'am. Thank you so much. Namaskar.